Having an interest as I do in presentations and verbal communications, I'm always fascinated on communication around sport. Sport is difficult to explain because it's physical and it's fast and it's intuitive. How do you put that into words? And some very famous sports communicators and presenters aren't very good at it. So here's two examples of people who are very good at it, and I want you to notice what they do. The first one is Dermot, who is the golf correspondent with the Independent, formerly the Irish Times, and he's talking on a Newstalk podcast about Pádraig Harrington. See if you notice anything, any communication technique that he uses in this short clip.
I mean, a lot of the silly shots that were played out there over the last few days were because fellas decided not to think clearly. Rory decided on the tee that he was going to take the driver out and overpower the golf course. Now, Jack Nicklaus came over to play the Open Championship for the first time in 1962 at Troon. And Joe Carr told me that he consulted with Joe and talked with Joe about how you should actually play a links, what was different between it and the target courses that Nicklaus was used to in the States.
I had the pleasure of interviewing Dermot Gilleece last week, and he does this all the time. He relates insights that he's talking about in the present with examples from the past, specifically related to people that you can relate to, other famous golfers. In this case, Jack Nicklaus from as far back as 1962. But you'll notice even the way he anecdotalizes this particular reference, this story. He talks about Joe Carr telling him about this particular thing. So it's very anecdotal, it's very story driven, person, place. So there's the insight and then the person's name and then what happened to them. He doesn't do this, it's not a contrivance, it's just a natural conversational technique. Here from the same podcast are two more examples.
I don't know what the answer is, but then again, it's not all putting because as I've indicated there, he had 12 wedges. Christy O'Connor used to say that with a wedge in his hand, he was disappointed if he didn't leave the ball around 6 feet from the pin. Lack of intensity, for a 29-year-old. I mean, mind you, Lee Trevino, I'll just finish with this. Lee Trevino once said that when God hands out gifts, he never gives you everything. He always holds something back.
In the background there, while Dermot was talking, you might have noticed Paul Kimmage, and he's the other example of storytelling that I want to show to you today. And he does it slightly differently, and not always. He sometimes uses the same approach as Dermot Gilleece, but obviously the cyclists that he would have cycled with, and those examples might not be as easy to relate to as people like Seve and Rory McIlroy, but he does something else. So here are two clips from the same podcast, and Paul Kimmage talking, and see if you notice how he uses stories.
Froome at every turn, which we'll get to. How have you found the week, Paul?
Really enjoyable. Joe, really enjoyable. As a young boy, I first heard of this area when I was 8 years old, and it was through a film that was done on the Tour of Ireland that year, and an Irish winner, Paul Elliott, who was a brother of Seamus Elliott, and Paul Elliott. And I'm just going to leave that, or treat that the way we treat WWF, because it's just an absolute mess, a total mess, and I met a man actually here the other night whose young sons were racing and are racing very successfully. And I could tell that they were ambitious and this is what they were looking at. And he actually was thanking me for what I've done, and it gives his son a chance now. And I didn't have the heart to say, listen, for God's sake, just try and get him to do something else.
So these are stories from his own personal experience, and really they're the two types of stories or examples I always urge people to use in their presentations. Either talk about something famous, something that people will be able to relate to, or talk about yourself. Your own stories are gold dust in any presentation. There you have Paul Kimmage talking about something that he saw on television when he was 8, and basically a story about a guy he met in the pub. They're both relevant to the points he's making. So it's insight and then story in order to back up what he's saying, similar to Dermot, but very, very personal stories. I always say to people, the stories that will come out naturally in the Q&A at the end, just take them and put them into your presentation. The stories you would have in a conversation with people in that audience, put them into the presentation proper. It's a very easy fix for making your presentations much better. And if you don't believe me, watch the good sports communicators, listen to them the next time on the radio, next time on their podcasts, and listen to those stories.